Previously, Tornak was able to convince the Greencloak Praetors that their best option to not die a painful death was to let the group go. Taria and Batalha went to search the Praetor's ship, finding a variety of useful items, as well as some of the group's belongings that had been taken on board, such as, for example, the Book of Probably Evil and Very Dangerous Rituals that Taria had handed over to Zaya just the day before. And, Tornak's dead body, so a few somewhat important things maybe. There was also an item that was revealed to be a signal that had recently been set off. The Praetors had called for backup before heading to the cave after Fate's Folly. The group decided to let the remaining Praetors stay in the submersible while they destroyed their ship. Since there was backup on the way, it most likely wouldn't be a death sentence. Keelan took a look at a map of ship movements that Taria had found, quickly realizing that the nearest ship belonged to Valtraxian. He would be the backup on its way. Upon realizing that, the group decided to head to shore as quickly as they could. Keelan took the ship underwater, since it was now an option, as he felt it was best to not let the Praetors know which way they were traveling, and a bubble of air appeared around the deck as it sank under the waves. Once the ship was underwater, everyone split up somewhat. Taria went to the hold to cast Gentle Repose on the bodies of the 4 reluctant crew members / prisoners that she'd pulled from the water. Sean took several of Zaya's belongings that the Praetors had stolen back to their room and checked to make certain that everything she had hidden in the room was still there. Then she quietly postponed any pending mental breakdowns. Keelan steered the ship while a somewhat bemused Thyrisian talked to Tornak. On deck, a giant yellow eye suddenly appeared in the water in front of the ship. Then another, and another. 9 eyes appeared before it was all said and done, which wasn't at all worrisome. Keelan immediately started trying to communicate to make it clear that he was a friend of the ocean and wasn't there to cause harm, and the entity quickly explained that he wasn't who it was there for. The eyes, or more specifically the entity and/or entities that they belonged to, were there for Thyrisian. A voice explained that they were the Abyssal Convocation, and they were aware that he had sworn an oath to prevent the Shadowspawn from corrupting other planes. Thyrisian made an agreement with the entity for more power to complete his oath. He was given a stone that felt as if it had a pulse of some type, like a heartbeat. The entity then turned its attention to Keelan, telling him that most of his people had left the sea. It asked if he planned on fleeing as well. It seemed pleased when Keelan told it no, and when Keelan mentioned that they wanted to try to reach Port Freehaven, the current around them moved to a ridiculously fast speed. Around that point, Sean and Taria both came on deck to find out what the fuck was happening, because everything they'd felt and heard below decks was somewhat concerning. Time passed, with the ship showing no sign of its air bubble disappearing once it was past the hour mark, as it should have. Keelan got the impression that some type of magic was protecting the ship and keeping it underwater until it reached its destination. Late in the evening, Sean told the others that she could try to bring Oz back before they went to bed for the night, if the others would be willing to help participate in a ritual similar to the one they'd done with the prophetess to try to bring back Tornak. The others agreed, but Tornak said he wanted to make sure they cleared the air before they attempted to bring back Oz. Several somewhat complicated conversations then occurred regarding recent events. The conversation eventually turned back towards attempting to resurrect Oz, and Sean told the others that she was willing to at least try to bring him back. As she said those words, the sky tier she'd just pulled out to prepare for the ritual suddenly shifted into a glowing deck of cards. Sean instinctively knew that the cards were going to be part of the ritual that she needed to cast. She had the others join her around Oz's body, creating a diamond around it with her at his head. Thyrisian was curious to find out what type of magic was being used, and he used Divine Sense to get a better feel of it. He sensed a strong feeling of the divine around Sean, and for a moment he saw the figure of a woman wearing a heart symbol that felt like good luck personified. Then he blinked, and there was a man dressed in black with the symbol of spades on him who felt like the opposite type of luck. And for just a moment, Sean saw the same 2 figures hovering beside her. As Sean directed the others to move into place, she shuffled to deck and prepared to deal each of them a card. The cards were kind. Taria was dealt the Jack of Clubs. Keelan was dealt the Ace of Spades. Tornak was dealt the 10 of Diamonds. And the final card that Sean drew was the Queen of Hearts. Oz's eyes opened and he gasped for breath. Once he was fully conscious, he immediately started to apologize, clearly realizing what had happened. The group then settled in to get some rest, as it had been a very long day. While the others rested, Keelan cast Plant Growth for 8 hours straight as a means of remembrance for everything that had happened. The next morning, Tarya took over watching the wheel of the ship while Keelan got some rest. Then, once he finished his trance, Tarya grabbed him for alchemy purposes. Sean pulled Oz aside to talk to him about Zaya a little. Both of them had very complicated emotions going on involving her decision to accept the wish spell. Tornak went to sit on the deck and look at the ocean above and around them, as did Thalrizian. Later in the day, Tarya asked Sean about resurrecting the crew, which is something she'd also brought up the day before. Sean went to gather the others for backup with that conversation because she was almost certain there was no chance of a resurrection ritual working. She also didn't think any of them had a strong enough connection with the crew for it to even be a possibility. But she didn't know how to break that to Tarya because, well, Tarya. The group tried to explain to Tarya why they didn't think trying to resurrect the crew would work, but Tarya didn't want to hear that and insisted that they had to try or they weren't any better than the Praetors. She then turned invisible and stormed off, as teenagers are wont to do. The rest of the group discussed it among themselves, and they decided that Sean could spare the magic. They had enough Sky Tears to attempt one resurrection, even knowing it was probably a waste. They all thought the odds were slim that it would work, considering Sean was the only person on the ship outside of Tarya who even knew the crew's names, but they suspected that seeing it for herself might be the only way to convince Tarya of that fact. It was decided that Tornak would join in the ritual, since he'd at least spend some time talking with the crew, but neither Keelan or Oz particularly thought that they'd be helpful. Tornak went to talk to Thalrizian to see if he'd be willing to try, even though he was a stranger. During the conversation, Thalrizian revealed that his heart didn't beat, which is why the gift he'd received from the entities seemed so important. Considering his circumstances, he felt as if he should try to help with the ritual. Tornak then made a mental note of the whole no beating heart thing, as it seemed like something the group should probably be made aware of sooner rather than later. Around that point, Thalrizian pointed out that he hadn't been properly introduced to the majority of the group in all of the chaos the day before. He was led over to the others, minus Tarya, who was still hiding somewhere, hopefully on the ship, where a brief round of introductions occurred. Thalrizian and Oz talked for a little about the fact that Oz had been dead and was now back. The two of them found some common ground. And that is where we left off.